takes strategic writing, and you need to know how to write effectively. So my question was, what is effective environmental writing? And what I mean by effective is how can a writer convey the urgency of the environmental crisis while also in a way that also leads to changes in policy and changes in the consciousness of the reader and the desire for that reader to change behaviors. So in my exploration of this question, I was brought to one specific article first called The Death of Environmentalism. And it was written by two authors who were basically saying that the environmental movement needs to self-destruct and resurrect because of the failure that the environmental movement has had to effectively and adequately communicate to a broad audience in a compelling way. And so basically that the language use has not been effective and that it needs to be all reframed in a way that's no longer just targeted towards liberals and in a way that's not alarmist, siloed just in the environment and reliant on fact-based rhetoric. And so these writers used George Lakoff, who I became a little bit obsessed with this semester, crossed over from one class to another. And he is a cognitive linguist who uncovered the fact that, who developed the theories of metaphor and framing and exposed the fact that basically all language is metaphorical. So his example is the metaphor of time. So we talk about time through the framework of money. So we spend time, we waste time, and you can see this we frame all issues. So basically the mind is not logic-based and reason-based, but we frame the world through metaphor. And this is very significant because he says that trying to change people's minds by appealing to them through fact and rationality isn't going to change their mind, which is how the environmental movement and most writers base their rhetoric, is saying, you can see this in the presidential campaign saying, I believe in climate change, this is why you should believe in it, when really humans are inherently emotional. So we need more than reason to change our minds to think a certain way. So he basically says that language creates our the way we think, which then creates our reality and the behaviors that we act out. So in order to change minds, first we need to change the metaphors that we use. And George Lakoff argues that liberals have not been doing that. They've been what he calls it the old Enlightenment version of thought, that all you need to do is appeal to people based on reason, that people are inherently reasonable. And he says that that is an outdated mode of thinking, and that liberals have been relying on that, but it hasn't been working, and actually conservatives have been using the correct frameworks to frame issues to make people think a certain way. And that liberals have been falling into conservative frameworks and so losing out on issues. One example of that is using a war framework around climate change. If you look at basically all the rhetoric used in politics, it's in some sort of war framework. And it's used that way, fighting climate change, fighting, you'll see soon. So this article says, and George Lakoff says, that the environmental movement needs new metaphors, needs new frameworks, and basically needs an entirely new language. And that changing the mind literally requires changing the structure of the brain. So it's a huge task, but it all starts with language, which is really exciting for me because this is the place where people in humanities come into the environmental movement and really make a difference. So my questions coming out of this have been, do we need an entirely new language? Like, what does this new paradigm look like? Is the notion of needing to end environmentalism as we know it now right or wrong? What new metaphors would support systemic change? And what is effective language to communicate the need to end planetary destruction and to make people care? And I really wanted to understand like if environmental language has failed, because I will read books like The End of Nature by Bill McKibben, and it gets me really excited. But there is this truth to the fact that there's so many environmental books, and why is the systemic change still so slow if we have so many enlightened people talking about exposing all these truths about how we're destroying the environment? So in order to explore this theory of the need to destroy environmental language, I sought to find that out by reading two of arguably the most effective and influential environmental writers who happen to be women. I read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson and This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein. So they're an example of environmental writing, past and present. Silent Spring is known as the book that started the environmental movement. It was published in 1962. Rachel Carson documented the detrimental effects of DDT, which is basically sprayed everywhere on everyone for the purpose of eliminating different weeds and insects. It's still used, unfortunately, in some parts of the world for malaria. But she was just exposing the highly toxic nature of this, and she introduced ecology and interconnectedness of systems by showing how, by putting chemicals in the dirt, entire populations of robins will die, and showing all these interconnected, all the interconnectedness of our planet. And she calls for the government and public to take greater precaution in chemical use. And she exposes this, she's one of the first people that I found to expose this war rhetoric as it was used in relation to insects and weeds. This need to exterminate, this need to completely eradicate entire species just because they're inconvenient to humans. And so this kind of us versus them rhetoric, but in